This time on Poll Hub, there's a ton of chatter among the politinerati about how, once again, the polls were wrong in the just finished midterm elections. Well, we beg to differ, and it's not just about how our polls were pretty close to dead on. We're going to get into this. Then, one of the biggest crises in America received very little attention in the midterms. More than 100,000 Americans are dying each year from opioids, but voters ranked it very low on their list of priorities. We'll talk with Zach Siegel, who writes extensively on the problem, to find out why there is such a disconnect. And we finish with a snack. No, not a figurative podcast snack, the real thing. Stick around. And hi, everybody. Welcome to Poll Hub. I'm JD Depp.
I'm Barbara Carvalho.
I'm Mary Griffith.
And I'm Lee Marigoff.
We are now post-election by a week and a half. Well, about a week. It's actually Wednesday we're recording this. So 8 days after the election. And there's been a lot of chatter about how the expectation of the red tsunami or the red wave turned into a red ripple at best. And a few folks have ventured out on a limb to say, oh, the polls were wrong. The polls blew it. We've got a problem with that because that's not true, right, Barb?
Well, there's no fun writing a story or telling a story about how the polls were perfect. So there's got to always be something a little wrong. But this time, actually, the scientific and rigorous methodological polls did a really terrific job, us included. We had certainly one of our best years ever, if not the best year, because editorially, we had all of the winners in the races that we polled, and we only do tight races usually. We threw in New York because there was a perception that perhaps New York would be a tight race for governor. It certainly was a smaller margin than it has been in the past between Democrat incumbent Kathy Hochul and Republican Lee Zeldin, but it didn't really turn out to be the nail biter that was part of the conventional wisdom. But we did 14 races in 8 states from September. We did 7 Senate races and 7 governor races. If you kind of add that up, we did North Carolina Senate. They did not have a governor race, and the Texas governor at Texas did not have a Senate race. And so we were correct in terms of identifying the winner in 12 of those 14 races. 2 though, were tied. We had a tie for Warnock and Walker for Senate in Georgia. Surprise, surprise, it is a runoff. They were separated by decimal points, at least at this counting. There are other votes still to be counted. And Ohio, which we did early. We did that in the beginning of October, not later on, because they had a wide governor's race. Governor DeWine in our poll had a 13-point lead. He actually doubled that by Election Day. And we had a tied contest between Democrat Ryan and Republican Vance for Senate. And Vance did go on 3 weeks later to win that race by 6 points. So overall, we really had a stellar year. Not that polls should be predictive. They are snapshots in time. And that's why I put those caveats, particularly for the many polls that we did earlier on in October. But I think what they can provide is a narrative and a good narrative. And the good polls did that this year. The problem, I think, was probably there weren't a lot of us. The New York Times and Siena were another group that had a good year and did good polling, as did traditionally Ann Seltzer in Iowa. She had a Republican wave in Iowa, which was not surprising, but nonetheless, she called the winners and also within the margins that they did win by. And we didn't see very much bias in the traditional polls, but that's not the whole story.
So I think from my vantage point, just piggybacking on what you're saying, I mean, I think the polls need to provide, if they're not going to be a snapshot, and I understand we're evaluated that way, particularly the polls in the last week are evaluated more on, who's going to win, who's going to lose. The polls are so much more than that in terms of issues, in terms of what's driving the electorate, in terms of, the different coalitions that are forming. And I think that's a contribution that the polls can make. But I just am of the opinion that, we get to a point where these polls from a variety of sources, some of whom we don't even know the sources, we've never heard of these polling organizations, get lumped together in these aggregators like Real Clear Politics, for example. And I think more than anything, those polls individually and in their aggregate spun the whole pundit community and created this sense of the red wave. And it looked like to me, it was like a poker game. So you said, all right, I'll call you 5 seats in the House and I'll raise you five. And so, all right, I'll call your 10-seat margin in the House for the Republicans and I'll raise you five. By the time they got done doing that, and I'm being facetious, obviously, but there were estimates that got into the 30s in terms of how many seats the Republicans might gain in the House, and it was based on a lot of stuff that just wasn't very good in terms of
Hang
polling.
on, there's 2 issues here, though. The fact that there were polls that were not quality polls that were lumped in, and in the past, everybody has said, "Oh, well, we're not sure who's going to be right or wrong. We're not sure who the good poll or the bad poll is. Let's just average everything,
Yeah, let's take an average of them
and the
all. Yeah,
average will take care of it." Well, it's if you take an average, you can also game the system, which seems to have happened this time.
I will add to that, Barb, that Nate Silver at 538 tries to make a House effect adjustment based on the track record of the organization. So if you have an A rating, you're going to count more than if you have a B rating. The problem is that there were a lot of polls that sort of showed up. People didn't know who they were. They were presumably most of them were sponsored by Republicans or interest groups with an ideological focus to them. And they didn't really have a track record. And my guess is a lot of them are gone right now. I think they were there just for the purpose of doing some slightly distorted polls that would just add to the Republican average. So you couldn't affect a measurement for House effect because they don't have a track
Well,
record.
but hang on, this has been going on for cycle after cycle.
Yeah.
This is not new. So what made this cycle different?
Well, part of it is the lack of quality polls. So we're alone
Yes.
out there with Siena, and that's it. I mean, nobody else is out there pretty much in these states, especially down the home stretch in the last couple of weeks. There's just nothing else out there. And then you look at these averages, and there's 20 polls out there. 20 polls that have no track record or they aren't transparent. They don't say what their methodology is. Not all of them, but a lot of them. And they're all lumped together, like you've been talking about. Look, the message here is somehow that the polls missed again, that is being promulgated by the very people who screwed up, who are the pundits, by paying attention to these aggregators and the sense that they're getting from talking with inside pollsters, the pollsters who are polling for the Republican and the Democratic parties. Well, look, that's all well and good, but own up to the problem. The problem is you bet on the wrong horse because you listened to the wrong people, or you followed the wrong polls, or you didn't pay attention to where the quality was going. The thing I think that bothers me most is because I'm now on the inside, I was a reporter for a long time, I know how hard we have worked since 2018 to try and figure out why the polls were wrong in 2018. We were all, not everyone, but there's no mystery that the polling industry has had a problem since 2016. It was in 2018. It was in 2020 in various ways. And we have worked so hard to try and figure that out. And other quality pollsters have too. And there's no credit given there. The pundits just kind of lump us all together and say, oh yeah, Trafalgar, who, got an A rating from 538 and, was crazy.
I think they were about something like 7.5 points off on the average or something.
And yet they're given
Yeah.
as much weight as scientific, quality pollsters who are doing the hard work. And that would be my message to the pundits is, okay, stop with the punditry for a minute and report on who's doing the hard work. And yeah, that's us. We're not alone. There are quality pollsters doing the hard work. Go do that story and stop spewing this garbage about how the polls
and
missed.
there's no guarantee that the quality polls are going to be good. Although I will say in 2016 and 2020, the polls were not even as bad as the reputation because we don't even draw a distinction not only between quality polls, good quality polls, and bad quality polls. We lump that all in with aggregators, which is a whole different thing. It's made up of an average of polls, but it's not a poll.
And forecasters.
And then we go to forecasters, who is kind of like my pet peeve a little bit because I jokingly said about a month before the before the election day, there was uh, eh, one of the forecasters that put out there was a 70% chance that the Democrats would hold the Senate and a 70% chance that the Republicans would take the House. And there's a 60% chance that one of those two was wrong. And I know I've said that before, but it just sort of drives me a little nutty. Like, you're watching sports now and you see that there's a 56% chance that the guy's going to catch the ball in center field after he's caught it. So, I mean, it just bottom line, bottom line, we got to get a sense of there's a little more need to dig into the polls and who's doing what. We changed our methodology somewhat for a variety of reasons. We're happy to share that. We're transparent. We're happy to share what we do with anybody, and that should be a yardstick and a warning sign. If you're not going to be transparent and you're not going to say who sponsored the poll, that should be a big yellow flag.
So, Barb, you bring the temperature down. The two of us have gotten
Yeah, I'm
crazed.
getting annoyed.
Bring the temperature down.
Yeah.
Close out the segment. Yeah, be the voice of
Yeah.
reason here.
I'm
Oh,
wild. I'm wild.
you've got to be kidding. You know you guys are crazy if you're coming to me to be the sane one. Especially when it comes to polling. I'm such a polling zealot. But quality and science do matter. I think there were a lot of different reasons, a lot of different decisions that went into why a number of the organizations did not poll through the election for the midterms. One of it is significant cost and certainly a difficulty connecting with people, not because they don't want to talk to us, but just because of the technology and also the ability to connect with folks on the many phone numbers that they do have. So I think we, as an industry, too, have to kind of look at how polls are being seen and whether in fact elections are something that we're all going to be all in on, because I think it does provide a very important service. One of the really tough things in the midterms, and we've been talking about statewide races and the polling of states and the national generic. A lot of it is at the congressional level, and that's also almost impossible to poll without being very expensive. And I think when you're looking at the pundits and the aggregators, and I'm not going to come out of you know, against the polls on this, but I think that they are in a tough spot because they do
Mhm.
want to provide a sense of how the election is going, and there isn't good quality information and polling and measurement that is going on at the congressional level. They really are at the beck and call of the pollsters that are on the Democrat and Republican side.
Okay. I would just say we're about a discussion, a deep dive into a very serious issue, which also I think this campaign really lacked. I mean, I think we really didn't have any dialogue on issues, and I think that's something that was another dimension to this. But I will say one last point on polling: the exit polls, which are done by Edison Research, very often get blamed, and it's thankless work because hey, they did a great job this year. But you're not going to see that article either. Exit polls helped the narrative, helped drive us through, and
So, guys,
that's not the
look,
article.
quality and science matter. Pundits, aggregators, forecasters. Okay, pay attention. Pay attention. Do your research.
Mm.
Find out what you're actually putting into those models. That they're not all the same. So on to our next topic.
While issues like inflation, abortion, and crime took center stage this election cycle, there was little discussion about the opioid crisis in America, yet it still does continue to be a large problem. The CDC estimates that more than 105,000 Americans died of drug overdoses in 2021, with 65% of those deaths related to synthetic opioids like fentanyl, and a 15% increase from the prior year. We take a look at polling. According to state polling this election cycle by Suffolk University and USA Today, in the weeks leading up to the midterms, those numbers showed that opioids were low on the list of the most important issue according to voters. So in New Hampshire, it was at 2%, Arizona at 3%, Florida 1%, and in Ohio 2%. Yet on the other hand, when we take a look at numbers from CNN and the Kaiser Family Foundation, as specifically if people thought the opioid epidemic was a crisis, a problem, or not a problem. 69% said that it was, in fact, a crisis. So, what accounts for this disparity between public opinion in terms of the impression of opioids in America versus the importance in the political realm? We are joined here today by Zachary A. Siegel. He is a freelance journalist and recovering addict, writing about the opioid crisis, addiction, and mental health. He is also co-host on the podcast Narcotica, and he co-writes Substance, a Substack about drugs and crime. Zach, it's a pleasure to have you here today. Welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me.
It's our pleasure. So let's take that question straight off the bat. Why is there this disparity?
It's very hard. I think, like in political science, I see this problem a lot where we want to reduce a very complex world to like one variable or one thing. And I think as we saw with the outcomes of the midterms is that there was just a lot going on. There's a lot of topics that feel like they're competing with one another. And I think what was particularly interesting was this idea of crime being a major factor. And I think it's probably hard to disentangle drugs from crime. I think we tend to think of drug use as a crime, and it technically is a crime. And so I think drug dealing, open air drug use, it kind of, I think, was all under the umbrella of this notion of rising crime that did feel like a big part of the midterm election cycle. And, you know, what I've struggled with as a reporter is having this feeling like the opioid crisis and this huge surge of overdose deaths is a massive problem. But at the same time, like you said, it's kind of on the back burner. And drug policy, especially federal drug policy, is a bit of a backwater in Washington, D.C. It doesn't get the attention and resources as other topics. And so with all that, I think the kind of another driver here is stigma. Is like, this is hard to talk about. You know, it's a lot of people feel shame about drug use and having family members and friends and even themselves who have addiction. And so this kind of topic, I get why it might not be front of mind when there's so many things out there kind of keeping it suppressed.
When you talk about federal drug policy as a backwater, do you think that's part of why it's a backwater? Is that public opinion, people in Washington hear all about inflation, the public's concerned about inflation. They're concerned about saving democracy. They're concerned about abortion. They're concerned about maybe the border, in some states and among some constituencies. But they don't hear very much about opioids other than the very troubling headlines about the data.
Yeah. In my reporting, it just seems like a lot of the action in drug policy is very local. I think for the federal government to make moves on drug policy, they're just quite limited in like what they have the capacity to do. And I think that's especially emblematic in the fact that the director of the Office of National Drug Control Policy was demoted from a cabinet level position during President Obama's era. And so this office has been, demoted from the cabinet level. It's still in the executive branch, but it just seems like it has less power than it used to. And then as far as Congress and legislation, there's just so many bills on expanding access to addiction treatment that everybody purports to agree on, but is stalled. And so there's just not a lot of action in the federal government.
Zach, when I think back, we at the Varus Poll did a survey back in 2017 with our national polling partners, PBS NewsHour, and we focused on the opioid crisis. I think that was back probably 2017, 2018, around that time. So this obviously is not a new issue, but then came the COVID pandemic. And so discussion stopped about the opioid crisis. Beyond the legislative stall that perhaps came about as part of the focus on COVID, talk to us a little bit about how the pandemic may have impacted the crisis in and of itself.
Yeah, I think at the top of the segment, you mentioned this kind of 15-20% jump in overdose deaths over a year. And that was a bigger jump than normal. And I think a lot of the epidemiologists and researchers in drug policy that I speak with, They point to isolation as probably one of the main factors, where opioid overdose deaths are especially preventable with drugs like naloxone, which reverse the respiratory effects of a opioid overdose. But if people are alone, then there's no one there to revive them. And so part of the surge in overdose deaths, it doesn't really seem to be driven by a surge in use, meaning there wasn't like some gigantic new population of drug users, but more like the already existing population of drug users were just now more at risk of an overdose. And so I think the pandemic certainly had that effect, just in terms of people kind of losing their social support and social networks and not having someone there to revive them.
This crisis has also changed. I mean, originally it was about opioids being overprescribed. We learned all about in West Virginia these massive numbers of legal, pharmaceuticals being overprescribed. But fentanyl has kind of changed this. So this isn't a crisis that has existed kind of in stasis. It's really changed. How do you think that has impacted how we talk about it and what we aren't really doing about it?
Yeah, it is super interesting to take that into account because right now, what we're witnessing in the illicit drug trade is this transition away from legal kind of prescription drugs and even kind of agricultural drugs like cocaine and heroin. The market has shifted to synthetic drugs almost entirely, mainly methamphetamine and, as you said, fentanyl. Neither of these require like growing acres of crops and paying farmers and cultivating all this land. All you need are the right chemical precursors and some kind of underground factory, basically, to produce at a massive scale. And I think this has really shifted things to another huge point of campaign rhetoric was the border and border security, and especially on the right, kind of this notion of open borders and, or more specifically, Biden's open borders, and that the whole drug overdose narrative kind of gets conflated with this crisis at the border. And so
Because fentanyl is coming across the border, there's all these seizures. Yeah.
yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, where it isn't that asylum seekers and migrants from across Latin America are smuggling fentanyl on their person. That would not be able to supply all of America with fentanyl. This is coming in through trucks, through trade, through ports of entry, literally by the ton and the truckload, that no single person or family of people showing up at the border seeking asylum could possibly be smuggling this many drugs. And so to your question, it's like I just see the issue really getting muddied all over the place and kind of distracting us from the fact that yes, the supply is a major problem, but what America seems to really struggle to wrestle with is, especially politicians, wrestle with the demand of why so many people are seeking this drug, why so many people want it, what is the kind of nature of the pain that people are trying to relieve with this drug use. And until I think we really focus on that and address that, we're kind of stuck in this same cycle of the drug war kind of policies and rhetoric that up until now have not been effective.
Well, Zach, I think we're going to have to leave it there. Zach Siegel, very much appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
So let's turn the corner here into our fun fact. This is the way we end the show. Sometimes it's challenging coming out of a serious topic like we just talked about. But this one, I think, is one of the most universal things that we have done. Lee, what is this fun fact this week?
Yes, close to my heart. It's a survey done by Greenberg, Quinlan, and Rosner a while back, 2006. Question, national audience: what kind of snack food do you eat most often? And I'm a two-fisted snack food eater, so I'm just constantly with something. But here, I'm not sure. Well, maybe you guys will disagree. But number one, snack food, fruit, 31%. Potato chips, second at 24. Candy and chocolate, now we're getting there. 16. Cookies and cakes, 16. Snack crackers, 16. Vegetables, oh, that's my favorite snack food, 14. And it goes on. Ice cream, 2%. Maybe they don't think it's snack food, but everybody likes ice cream. Anyway, so I would go anything taking out fruit and vegetables.
The healthy stuff. Take that out, and you're good. Okay.
I'm with any of those. Soda.
You forgot
know-
nuts and seeds at 13%, Lee. And
Oh,
I've
that's a
actually
good one, too.
I've seen Jay have a bunch of nuts and seeds on his desk. So he's
Yep.
Well, okay.
he's definitely
all right.
counted
Barb-
in that number.
So Barb, what's on your list? Note that this was there people gave multiple responses. So that's why this adds up to more than 100% when we're looking at all these numbers. But what's your single most often?
Well, I can
snacked
agree
food?
with Lee that I was surprised that ice cream was only at 2%. But then I do understand because I think of ice cream actually as a meal, not a snack.
It's the staple. It's the staple.
Yeah, it's one of the four food groups. Yeah, ice cream
and certainly
butter.
I probably would have picked fruit also because Skittles are fruit flavored. So there's
Barb.
lime and
Oh,
tangerine and
Mary,
no,
save
no.
us. Mary, save us.
I don't know if I could save you, but chips, definitely chips. But I do enjoy a nice piece of fruit every once in a while.
Yeah, but would you call it a snack? I mean, in this kind of genre,
Absolutely.
I'm gonna have a snack. I'm not gonna have the M&Ms. I'm gonna have.
So
an
Mary,
orange.
do you give your kids apple slices or something like that, or carrot sticks? As snacks?
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
Those are snacks.
That's to keep them away from the chips.
But what do they choose at
Oh.
school?
Oh, please. Oreos, cookies, chips, gummy bears, those types of things. Yeah.
Casey, what if you had to pick one? Casey, what would be the snack food you eat most often?
Candy.
Candy.
Skittles.
Okay.
Again.
Sarah, what's yours?
Lee's never gonna let me live this down, but I'm in that 31% with the fruit. I eat fruit all the time, every day, multiple times a day. So
I love it, Sarah.
Thank you. Thank you. And Will, what's yours on this list?
On the list, it would probably be, let's see here. I guess I don't know if it counts as a vegetable, I guess, but like wasabi peas. I've been eating a lot of those recently. Yeah, it's a bit
Oh, those
weird.
are good.
Yeah, I like
Yeah.
them a lot, and it's healthier than
Right.
candy.
Those
so.
those are good. Those are good. So here's the thing that surprised me most, and the thing I doubt the legitimacy of this survey. 8% of the people said they don't snack between meals. I don't buy it.
Wow.
I don't buy that.
Wow. I did used to be one of those people.
Really?
Yeah, I
Gosh.
did used to be one of those people, but now, yeah, no, polling has ruined that for me.
Yeah. I mean,
You take a long trip. You always take like a bag of stuff with you, a fun bag for a trip. Do you take apples and oranges? No, you take candy. And I'll tell
I
you
don't.
one other thing. I would, and the other thing I would say on this is in our survey center, we have lots of good snack food. None of it is a vegetable, and none of it is a fruit. So I
well,
think
that's
the
our.
kids would rebel if we went with
I don't
here.
know.
Have a
Maybe
banana.
we should be trying that,
Yeah,
Lee. Maybe we should be offering this. This poll offered these options. We don't offer the options in our polling center. Maybe we should offer them. I don't know. That's
Well,
food for thought.
Yeah.
That'll do it for this edition of Poll Hub.
Poll Hub is a production of the Marist Poll at Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York.
Mary Griffith is our executive producer.
Casey Schaff is our production supervisor.
If you enjoy Poll Hub, please consider leaving a review. Positive reviews help other listeners like you find us.
If you'd like to learn more about polling and survey science, check out the Marist Poll Academy, our free online learning portal.
If you have questions for us, tweet them directly to @MaristPoll.
Remember, you can always tell your smart speaker to play Poll Hub, and with any luck, it will cooperate.
Finally, wherever you listen to Poll Hub, there is a subscribe button.
Click it, and the latest episode will be ready for you in your podcasting app as soon as we release it.
We'll see you next time.